interesting that you say that because immediately, even though something that I recognize something that has come up for me this year, when I read a book, I like go all in. And after listening to the channel Soft White Underbelly, um, the host, he started interviewing a few psychologists, and one of which was Orion Terabin. And I don't know if you've heard him or any of his work.
But I shall write it down.
Yeah.
Orion.
Yeah. Orion Terabin, Tarban, or Taraban.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote a book called How We Value Others. And that reminds me a lot of this poet that you speak of because it's beautiful, but it's also kind of cynical. He talks about almost the economic reason why people end up together. And he talks about, exchange of, I guess, what we have to give. He talks about, the characteristics of what, a man needs to be like, a leader. He also talks very openly about women's timeline, when it comes to how they age. And
right. And then
it's
perceived value based on that. Yeah.
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 And it was interesting for me as the hopeless romantic to really meditate on that and kind of think, oh wow, yeah, like our window is quite precious even when it comes to having kids. And for myself included, it's like when you're in your 20s, you don't really think about that, especially if you're maybe discovering who you are in life and what you want.
Yeah.
And it kind of leads into what you said right there about, are you just going along for the ride?
Yeah. Oh, so there was what was that?
I feel like you were giving me the thumbs up. I did see that.
I didn't touch anything. That wasn't me. What happened?
I have a friend that always happens. She like doesn't even use her hands, and then all of a sudden it'll get like a thumbs up.
Okay, well in that case it was like that, and I thought,
yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Riverside. I wasn't thinking negatively. Anyway, okay, so what you're talking about now, which is in a life, it's very difficult to know what's right. Well, not that. What I mean is, despite what people will tell you, nobody hands you an owner's manual when you are 13. They all claim they do, except that their book or their position or their impression is only one of hundreds of thousands of opinions, and their opinions are no better informed than your instincts. But to return to a subject you and I had spoken with about last time we got together, the idea of hypnosis as a tool for manipulating other people is the opposite of its intention, which is to quiet the voices that are trying to tell you what to do and to finally listen to yourself. Mm-hmm. And when you describe Orion Terabin, what I'm getting is a kind of Machiavellian sort of interpretation of life as transactional, as a game you win, or at least a portrayal of life as a jungle in which if you do not eat others, you will be eaten. And I don't know if I'm interpreting him correctly, but it is. Go ahead.
It almost feels like he removes love out of the equation. If you were to remove love, like what does that entail?
Yeah.
And it is quite interesting. It's very like rational thinking, but it also almost kind of removes the mystery, the excitement, almost in some ways it's like it breaks us down as animals, but like what he almost has that missing piece of like what makes us human.
Yeah, to return to this idea of Orion Terabin's interpretation, which is slightly Machiavellian, a lot of people are not aware that Machiavelli did not just write The Prince. He wrote a follow-up book about the virtues of a republic over an aristocracy or an oligopoly. And it was a bit of an apology for his earlier book. The earlier book, The Prince, was written as a kind of calling card, if you will, to one of the Medici princes in the hope that they would get him out of prison. But the second was a kind of warning to people about like the dangers of concentration of power. And what he takes into account in the second book, not so much in the first, is the first book, I wouldn't call it cynical, but I would say it was an operator's manual for someone who only cares about power and does not care about the experience of living, but only wants to wind up at the top of the pyramid. So much of our at least in the United States, so much of our orientation is towards success in terms of accumulating vast wealth or power, with everything else being seen as kind of losing the game or making an excuse, or you only say that because you're not rich. What they don't account for is the fact that when you are living, you've heard that term solipsistic, where somebody believes that the entire world is created exclusively for your benefit and that other players don't have any, it's, if you will, a kind of first person shooter where everybody else is just a computer simulation. Once you grasp and have an accommodation for the idea that you take pleasure in other people's enjoyment or in being part of a successful place where everybody thrives, once you orient yourself towards that, I believe that there's more happiness in that interpretation of the game than there is in the one where you're just trying to accumulate power, because again and again, you'll see that these people have accumulated gigantic wealth and they really don't seem happy. Instead, they seem perpetually aggrieved, like they're always angry about something and they're always the victim about how, I need to change this because, otherwise my enjoyment of life is somehow diminished. Bro, when are you going to have enough to finally be happy?
Reading something, it was a decade ago. It said that money buys happiness up to 80,000 a year, and obviously based on inflation, that number is a lot
Yeah, probably
higher,
about
but
140 now.
yeah, yeah, exactly. That's what I said. That exact figure. And I believe in that because it's true. Money or numbers, it doesn't end. So
Yeah, I can't, forgive me if I'm going to botch this quote, but it's something like the problem isn't that the poor don't have enough money. It's that the rich never have enough. And it's not that I am orienting or getting on a soapbox to talk about the evils of wealth. What I am doing is I'm saying that human satisfaction, it does not align to this incentives of a culture based on perpetual consumption. That instead human satisfaction has to, at some point or another, accommodate the thriving of others. There's a Greek word, eudaimonia, which is, it is an state of human thriving. And the Greek ideal was, it isn't enough for me to be happy. I will derive my happiness from the general happiness. And that strikes me as a cleaner way to exist, one that glides rather than stomps. Lately, what I'm doing in my own sort of practice, if you will, where I'm trying to teach people to tell stories correctly, the choice of your material, what you choose to tell a story about, broadcasts very much about you. If your stories are upbeat and hopeful and they end with some lesson where being nice to people benefits you, then those stories tell me about you. If by the opposite chance, you are always aggrieved and you are always angry about something and you can't stop complaining and your stories are about how nothing works, and well, then that says a lot about you too. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't be upset about injustice or upset that perhaps, others are being unfairly kept from the spoils of achievement. It's just that if your entire existence is based on a rant, then you really have to take stock of, is this the brand that you want out in the world? Your brand, like your aroma, affects the commons. Take a shower.
Beautifully said. And I agree. And it's so funny how, you know what, we read about philosophers, we read about history, we read about like scholars, people that spend hours talking about like the mysteries of life. And it's funny how it all weaves in, and there's so much science-based evidence about, the highest frequency is joy, enlightenment, but also authenticity. And it's interesting, if you live in a very fear-based, almost jealous-based space, that
Yeah.
brand does not bring people in to the fold. It doesn't, people aren't attracted to you. They don't gravitate around you the same way as someone that is leading from passion, talking about ideas, kind of moving away from that kind of lower level kinds of conversation or just headspace in general.
I wonder, when you mentioned the word frequency, that's something that's very much on my mind these days. I would love to, it does seem quite instinctively, it feels right to me that there's an energetic vibration that comes off of somebody who is upbeat, positive, oriented towards the thriving of others. Okay. Look at the contrast, and have you ever run into this situation where there's somebody in your life that is either perpetually sick or always having bad luck? And I wonder if there isn't some kind of force where they are drawing this to themselves. And I don't have the scientific evidence to support this idea of that there's a vibration. But it would seem that upbeat, positive people or people who are enjoying the ride do tend to draw to them people of like. Maybe it's nothing more complex than just when you want to be happy, you seek out people who are happy. Do you know any of the science behind the vibrational interpretation of energy, like a person's energy?
If I've done a little bit of deep diving on like heart math, and that's something I've been really.
I'm curious about that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I can't like literally fact check it and like quote it perfectly, but I've done a few workshops. I know quite a few people that work heavily around it, and the more that, funny enough, I like talk about it, my algorithm keeps feeding me more information on
Yeah. Yeah.
just the frequency of what our heart emits when we're
Oh,
in a
okay.
space of love. Yeah, it's a very powerful force that we have within all of us. And I find it ironic because all of the religious and spiritual people talk about this. And they say, God is love, and it's like good things will happen to you when you lead in a space of love. know, Even with so much media coming in, a lot of fear, a lot of dysregulating energy, it
Mm.
leads us away from that. And ironically, I think it's something that we almost have to really focus on as like a priority in our life, is just surrounding ourselves with people we love, doing things that we genuinely love to do.
The heart energy that you're talking about, is that a measurable or it sounds like that's something that's been
It
I
is
don't know how they
measurable.
would measure it, but yeah, I'm going to explore that because let's say for the sake of argument, just to follow this thread, pretend that there is medical research that has demonstrated that there is a certain kind of, it's not an aura, but it acts like an aura. It is a signal that is broadcasting from literally from your heart. And that signal it's because the signal goes out, it gets received by certain kinds of antenna that are dialed into the same frequency. Just to stick with this model, somebody's out there with headphones and they're on the frequency 8, and then you're broadcasting on that same frequency. Because of that, there's a natural attraction. There's almost gravity that pulls you two together. And let's say by contrast, somebody else is on a frequency of 4 and their vibe is very negative, then the person whose headphones are on 8, they just don't get it. They don't hear it, or it's to them it's static, just
Mhm.
to stay with the analogy. And I wonder then if what lately I've been doing, which is I'm trying to say life gets so much easier when people like you. If you go out into the world and you radiate this frequency of 8, then what happens is more people that are craving that frequency are drawn to you. And I would think then that the signal gets boosted, so to speak. So if you could demonstrate that this was so, that there was a literal sort of aura broadcast, a broadcast of a certain energy, that it would create a physical phenomenon of attraction. So it's similar in outcome maybe to this idea of The Secret, right? Which is, like if you can manifest it. Now, because we have social media, whether that's LinkedIn or TikTok or, any number of the platforms, Facebook, etc. Okay, because there is social media, you can artificially broadcast your frequency. Now, I don't know if it has to be a physical thing where my heart is literally within hearing distance or not. Like whether the impulse coming off your body has a very limited distance. I forget what they call it, but you know what I'm talking about, the
Mhm.
footprint. But then if social media, it acts very much like a boosted radio wave where you can send it into space. So, through your demeanor and through your choice of subject and through your whatever signals that you send on this frequency, if it goes out into social media, the opportunity for you to draw people to you is abundant. Now, forgive me for this long rambling, kind of, what is it? This is meditation. Okay. I started doing videos maybe about 2.5 years ago, about 3 years ago. And what would happen frequently is people would say, oh, if you are in Terre Haute or if you happen to be in Shreveport, please let me know. I'd love to buy you a cup of coffee. That to me was, oh, that's the manifestation of what I'm talking about, which is strangers are reaching out to you and saying, hey, if you're in town, look me up. Now, from everything I've said, does that not sort of have the ring of truth?
Hmm.
It strikes me that if a stranger in Indiana is reaching out to me with an invitation for beer or bourbon, operating on nothing more than a video that I've done, which is basically just a little story about some experience that I had. What it's telling me is anybody can do that. They can find their tribe in 2025, 2026. They can find their tribe if they send the signal. And let's take your case. So you and I met at a TEDx in Grand Prairie, and your talk was quite meaningful to me. I remember that you were on just before me, and I remember thinking, oh, great. Now I have to follow this young gal who's done this incredibly selfless, wonderfully positive thing where you're trying to seek help for these people and you're using your art form as the mechanism. Now, imagine what's going through my head, Catania, because I'm going, so an artist is demonstrating that through the use of art, you can do very good things in the world. You can overcome some of the negative forces in the world. You can help the right people and so on. Okay. Now, what I should have been thinking instead of jealousy, what I should have been thinking is, oh my Lord, this is magnificent. We are absolutely in the same tribe. Now, I'm not doing the tangible, cool work that you're doing, but our argument is the same, which is, that is the baseline argument. I want to use my art form to demonstrate that small acts of kindness have incredibly high rates of return, that don't think that you have to do something grand in order to achieve something grand. Instead, think small. If you just do small things, you'd be surprised at the ROI. So then you and I wind up having later conversation. Again, I believe it's proof of this frequency thing where you are vibing on a certain frequency, and I'm receiving it. And then it becomes greater than some of its parts, because now you and I having a conversation about this subject, it is going to get sent out into the world again. And with some luck, more people will go, A, I get what they're saying. I want to take part in that. And B, let me reach out to these people and see if there's some way we can do even, it's more than a podcast, it's something else. So let's now return to the sort of what thing we started talking about at the beginning, which is, I don't remember whether this got recorded, but I came across that Bukowski poem called Nirvana, and in it, it tells the story of a young man kind of listlessly, without purpose, riding a bus to somewhere, stops in a diner just as the snow starts to fall, is so enchanted by the authenticity of the waitress, by the craziness of the fry cook, and by the wonderful laugh of the guy washing the dishes, that he thinks, there's something about this place. This is a wonderful place. And I have this instinct that it's always going to be wonderful. And he thinks, maybe I could just stay here. And in the poem, Bukowski repeats the phrase twice. He just goes, maybe I could just stay here. And then the bus driver invites them all to get back on the bus. And without thinking, he gets back on the bus and stares straight ahead and goes out of the hills of North Carolina and back to whatever life he was going to lead, listening only to the sound of the wheels. Now, the poem for me was quite sad. And the reason I think I was sad was because I thought how many times that's happened to me, where I thought I could just stay here, or I could participate in this thing that's filling me with the right kind of energy. But instead, somehow an obligation or an expectation or some kind of societal signal is pushing me away from that thing that I craved. Now, all of us are, to a greater or lesser extent, being affected this way. We will find places, people, and situations where we think, I could just stay here. I could just continue to enjoy the authenticity and the genuineness of this and the humanity of this. Or I could get back on that stupid bus, and it could roll out of this situation to wherever. Okay, which to me is, think about how many times that happens in your life where you are merely following instructions and not embracing what some part of your soul is telling you to do. There's a photographer, I don't know if he still works for the National Geographic. His name is Aaron Huey. And he was one of these guys who, he would explore his impulses. And his impulses were always very positive. Now, when I met him, he was doing a TED talk at University of Denver. And he was a great photographer, and we struck up a conversation after the TED talk, and he just had the most interesting life. And there was a stage in his life when he was voted by some magazine, like People magazine, one of the 10 coolest dads in America.
I believe that.
And he really was, because his son would go with him, at very young age, and he armed his son with a camera at, I think, the age of 3. And then the two of them would tour the country and do things like walk across the country. And he did this with his husky, and he had built this little wheeled conveyance behind his husky so that the husky he would hook it up to his dog, and the dog would tow their belongings. And then Aaron would they would hitchhike and they would walk. And as they walked across America, Aaron said that there were 2 occasions that were crazy but amazing. One was he very nearly got killed. He was walking too close to the road and a truck nearly hit him. And it was the fulfillment of his fears at that moment, which was, this was the thing that was most scary to him was, I could die out here. And he said it manifested in, and he very nearly did. And then when he was literally lying in the ditch and the cart was upside down and the dog was tweaked and everything like that, as he was lying there, he said, I think I did that to myself. I think I drew that to me. I think I'm going to give up on this idea that I might die out here and abandon that mindset. So he made a physical decision that he was going to come what may, was what he was telling himself. And he said, Neal, the amount of good fortune that came my way was unbelievable. I would go into a town where here I am, this long-haired, vagabond with my crazy dog. And by the way, the cart behind the dog, he had built these cardboard flames on it.
I love it.
So it looked like a kind of, I don't know, winged, chariot.
Yeah.
And he said that crazy thing that he decided to do, the way that he decorated that thing, it drew a certain kind of person to stop. And it was always a great person who was generous and sweet and invited him for coffee or for a meal or even gave him money. And I think he crossed the country with $200 in cash, and that was all he needed to get all the way across the country. And he said the generosity that came at him after that, once he's just said, come what may, he said it was astonishing, the generosity. Okay, so now he's in Pennsylvania. He's gotten all the way from Los Angeles to Pennsylvania. And he stays with this couple and for 3 months in this crazy little burg where all kinds of lunatic things are, it was a really sort of fringy couple. And he said, I just stayed as long as I thought it was appropriate to stay. And then eventually when it was time to go, he left and he made it to, I don't know, Maine, whatever. But in this adventure where he decided to stop, many, many things, many interesting things happened. Many people came through the transom and he wrote an account of all of this. And I just thought, Aaron, Huey is a man who has determined, come what may, he's going to make his own decisions. He's not going to go by other people's expectations, and he's not going to live by someone else's instruction manual.
And there's a level of authenticity with risk taking.
Yeah. You really do have to respect people that are willing to bet it all. I have never had that courage. For most of my life, I was playing this game. I was in advertising for 30 years. And Catania, the thing about advertising, and many of us would say this, was I was on the creative side of it. And we always considered it showbiz light, which was, it was almost show business, but not really. And, because it was paid attention. Okay. And showbiz light was absolutely a metaphor for my whole existence, which was, I will walk right up to the water on the beach, but I'll never go in it.
Yeah.
I'll never commit.
Yeah.
And it's, in some respects, it was probably, it's true to my character, which is I am not a courageous person. I wish I was, but I suppose that our family line has survived this long because we were always very reticent. I'm never going to jump out of a plane without a parachute. A lot of people do. That's never going to happen with me. Yeah. But imagine in your own life now, let's project this for you. Can you think of one, maybe a couple of times when if you'd really known who you were, if you knew then what you know now about yourself, if you would have done it differently? Does anything spring to mind that you might have done differently?
I can't say, because when I think about my authenticity and risk taking, I've had a few milestone moments, but I don't regret any of the big leaps, because even if it was something that maybe there were cons to the decision, they were definitely not on the forefront when it came to all the good that came out of it.
Okay. Yeah. I consider that what you just said. Probably if a psychologist heard that, they'd go, that is a very healthy woman. And the reason I say that is you're deciding that the outcomes, positive, negative, and everything in between, is part of the learning that makes you who you are. And and I've encountered this many times where seemingly bad things that happened to me, I never should have been as upset as I got, because in the end, it shapes you with humility and it gives you the appropriate level of caution. And all of my best stories that I tell are usually because of something foolish or some failing on my part. And I think people really identify with the fact that when I'm telling these stories, it is not bragging about how wonderful I am. It is saying, this was the idiot that I was, and this was what I learned from it. I do those proudly. I always tell stories about my own failures quite proudly. I don't feel much shame from the stupid things that I've done because we're all in this together. The owner's manual is tattered and kind of covered over in notes and, crossed out margin corrections.
And something that always has come up for me is like, yeah, like for me, coming from a more religious background, it's like the Bible was a user's manual for life. But
Mm,
I truly stand by some things cannot be told, they can only be experienced
mm,
in order to be integrated. Because there's wisdom from those quote unquote failures, lessons. There's inherently, it's like embedded into your subconscious or embedded into your psyche and embedded into, I guess, the wisdom that you end up sharing with other people. And I think we live in a society that almost has so much shame around it. We're scared to wear our scars. So that's incredible that you are so open about, hey, you know what? Maybe I was, blissfully unaware of the outcome, but this is what I learned, walking through fire.
something that's happened, something's happened to me lately, which is uh, in my former career when I was a creative director in advertising, the benefit of it was I was like 50 years old, but I was hanging out with 25-year-olds. And that was my world, was these people. Well, I had the other world, which is that I'm trying to sell stuff to 50-year-olds. The times when I was most in my element was when I was hanging out with these 25-year-olds. And then I would go and I would use the men's room and I would look in the mirror and go, who the hell are you? Like, who let this old guy in? And what it demonstrated to me was, oh, wow, you really do become the people you hang out with. And one of the things that used to happen more was when people were working in the office more, there was more age diversity. And it allowed the older people to feel younger, and it allowed the younger people to be wiser and to take advantage of the experience of other people. And what happened in advertising was they fired anybody over the age of 40 because they were too expensive. And so that went out the window. And then the second thing was that the industry basically collapsed because of new developments like Google search and Facebook, and that took like 80% of the money. And then the holding companies that bought all the advertising agencies, well, they all wanted their 15%. And so there were no raises anymore and there was no
Mhm.
salaries. You couldn't have staffs. And, there's only so long a machine can operate at 1/3 of its former glory before people go, why are we paying you? And the whole thing just collapsed. But the one thing that I think was the most tragic was the idea that the generations weren't mixing anymore. There weren't people who had been there for 18 years, who knew everything about everything. The institutional knowledge was what kept the whole thing running. And there are traditions in other organizations, the United States Navy being a really, really good example. I'll bet you it's exactly the same in the Canadian Navy, which is there's a person who basically runs the entire thing called the Chief Petty Officer. Now, the Chief Petty Officer is an enlisted man or woman. And what they do is, unlike most of the other armed services, the Chief Petty Officer's responsibility, among other things, is to train the next generation of officers. And the beauty of it is that you can't be a Chief Petty Officer with less than probably about 15, 18 years in, which is going to put you at a certain age range. And then here comes a new ensign who's fresh out of the academy, or he's just walked out of naval, officer training school, comes aboard the ship, and he's ordering people around. Now, you can really make a lot of mistakes if there isn't somebody who's grizzled and been through the ringer and who understands, like, listen, Junior, you want to be a
Mhm.
good officer? Listen to me. Don't do that. Okay. Now, it's crazy to me that such an old institution, these old navies, with all of their old traditions and so forth, would have this one thing that they get so right, which is you use the older people to train the next generation, and the older people are judged by the effectiveness of the people that they let out into the world. And that to me is something gravely missing
Yeah.
from contemporary business, which just chaps me.
Yeah, I noticed that myself. For myself, I graduated right in the midst of the recession, particularly in Canada. So I learned very quickly that minimum wage was not going to get you very far.
Oh, yeah. Well,
Yeah. And
yeah.
then I noticed when you go into the workforce, they really don't want to train you for long, but there's also this lack of mentorship. that I see through a wide array of industries. And it's an ongoing conversation I have with quite a few people where it's kind of more heavily focused on scaling the business, hitting your margins. But
Sure.
then it's
Yeah.
like the people side of it of you need to have, a wide array of, multi-generational, you know, employees and all helping each other raise the bar when it comes to the field that they're in, constantly like learning and adapting, growing together so that you can raise the next generation to take the baton and, do it better as technology evolves, as like the company evolves.
Yeah, there's something very human about mentorship and protege, but it's being analyzed or it's being dated out of companies, which is not to say that it's companies everywhere. For example, my daughter works for an organization that where the management is very admirable. They're doing really well, but these people by nature they have to be sort of sympathetic and understanding. It's part of their success is that they're very human. They, as a profession, have to connect with people, partly sales, partly for their profession and so forth. And she will come home with these stories, and I just think, I pray you recognize how lucky you are that these are your bosses because they're teaching you all the right lessons. And I could see you joining that company, rising steadily to become a partner. I could see that happening. I've got the image in my mind. And someday when those people pass on, you will weep. If there's anything that I wish I could pass along to colleagues and children everywhere, it's that this is not a game to win. This is a game to experience. And I cannot, if there is to be any meaning to this, it is not through the accumulation of tokens. It can't be that. If that's all it is, what the hell? What a bogus board game.
Yeah. And I have two things that come to mind. I think about the analogy of the crabs in the bucket.
Yeah.
Are they grabbing the legs to pull the legs down, or are we all choosing to help each other up and rise together? The other thing that comes to mind is I heard something very thought provoking. It was an episode of Diary of a CEO with
Mm.
the very knowledgeable and incredible public speaker and figure, Brene Brown.
Mhm.
And she talks about power. She talks about how some people look at power as finite. And so, I have this pie, and if I give you a piece of it, I'm missing something.
Yeah.
As opposed to, why don't you just bake another pie? And so it really is circumstantial. I think it really depends person to person, when they feel like they've lost a sense of self or a sense of power, like what kind of got them to a point to think that there isn't enough to share for all of us. Or if I give you, admiration or recognition or, something like tangible, why are you feeling like you have less? And it's a bigger question to a whole topic in itself.
No, I can't help thinking that somebody who is playing the game as a zero sum, where I can only win if you lose, there's something in childhood trauma and
Yeah.
acting out there. We have a kitten in our house. Well, he's not a kitten anymore. We've had him for a year and a half. This kitten is adorable, and we've never done anything but be super good to it, and we have played with it and so forth. It will not let us pet him. It will not. The best I've gotten so far is it will let me stroke his tail for about like 3 things, and then he's gone. Clearly, something happened to this cat around human beings. And, despite all evidence that we are loving and feed him and, protect him, so forth, it feels like he will never break free from this problem. And a lot of people are operating in the world like that. They cannot let down their guard. And in that perpetual armored up, radar up, suspicion of others, they are missing, they are lonely, and the loneliness only compounds in their negativity. I shouldn't stay so negative.
But I do know where you're coming from with that. Because it could be a wide array of different topics. I think about even when it comes to like being authentic, like showing your authenticity on like a public scale, but also even in relationships. A big thing that I see now is if someone were to let their guard down and then they were in fact wrong, all of a sudden the person that was vulnerable is almost at fault for putting their guard down when actually the risk in itself is part of the learning lesson and actually pure of heart. more often than not.
Yeah, I would return to the Aaron Huey example of there he is lying in a ditch, having almost been killed by a bus. And he says, from now on, it's just come what may. It doesn't mean I'm going to stop walking. On the contrary, I'm going to move on from now with a very different attitude, come what may. And doors started to open. And, you've noticed, it has to be happening in Canada because it's certainly happening here. It's the way that they're trying to drive the sexes apart. These very popular social media channels where somebody is saying that all women are gold diggers, and then they'll have the opposite version of that, all men are pigs. And this deliberate dividing of the sexes, the genders, I'm not sure there's a more evil use of social media. I mean, there is probably,
Mhm.
warmongers and so on. But the idea of taking half the population and setting it off against the other half, what is your mission statement
Mhm.
exactly? What are you?
Mhm. I know sometimes I think about whether it is by design, but also, yeah, I sometimes wonder, I mean, that once again is a whole topic in itself, but if you create a war between people, how does that affect, the globe on an entire scale? And so it just all makes us treading water by ourselves in the ocean. And we're all just trying to see who floats the
Yeah,
longest.
yeah, let's face it. I mean, we are biological cocktails of competing and conflicting emotions. I'm going to just return to something that was when we first met. The idea was my gig was I think people will be surprised on the return of investment they get by making a daily point of trying to do a kindness for someone. I did something what I was quite proud of today, which is I had drawn a cartoon, which I really liked. I just thought it was cool. So I decided randomly I was going to mail it to one of my friends. Now, I was in this diner and I was having, some enchiladas and eggs, and I didn't have my phone. So I chose that time to borrow the pen from the waiter. And then on the back of the envelope that I sent the cartoon in, I just wrote a poem. Okay. Now, all I was really doing was killing time. But I know that the outcome of this is that this guy, Gene, that I'm sending this letter to, he's going to understand that I was thinking about him. It'll be fun for him at the other end of this experience to go, good God, this giant poem on the back of this thing, this must have taken him an hour. Well, yeah, it did, because that's how long it took me to eat lunch or, breakfast. Okay. But the thrill of knowing that somebody out there cares about you, not in any romantic way, it's just a gesture of belonging. Now, I get to, for the rest of the day, I'm feeding off of that energy of knowing that letter's in the mail.
Mhm.
There's more fun to send a package to somebody so that when they get it, they will enjoy it. It's more fun to do that than it is to get the package.
Yeah. Yeah, and the intention behind it.
Yeah, there's, when couples are first getting together, they'll do things like that for each other. But then they'll see some social media post where somebody's grinding an axe about how women are gold diggers, or men are pigs. And then they'll amplify that. And then it'll make people feel like, yeah, he doesn't do this for me. Or, maybe I should protect maybe I shouldn't be buying her dinner. Oh, good Lord.
Mhm,
Sorry.
mhm.
I don't quite grasp the impulse to spread division.
Yeah. I It reminds me of something I've had multiple conversations with people, and don't get me wrong, like this is the argument that goes back to authenticity and, come what may, and just living in joy and curiosity and playfulness and that childlike energy. And then knowing that we live in a reality where, the signals could be maybe of a different frequency, having to be grounded and having to take life a little bit more seriously. But I always had this mentality of like, could you be in a partnership where you're always in that honeymoon phase, where you're always sending each other little letters and being sweet and thoughtful and intentional and in that playful authenticity? And then sometimes I have to ground myself and go, well, you know what? Life isn't always like that. It's about the contrast. But sometimes I wonder, and then once again, when you add the division to it, it makes you a little bit more maybe cynical towards, is this something that exists? It's, I think, maybe part of the journey.
I do not know the name of actually, let's return to your last sentence. I just love that part of the journey. Yeah, we got to accept that this is a journey we're all on. We're all experiencing it together. And someday somebody's going to they'll figure this out. When you look at people that become political leaders, so often these are damaged people who are so damaged that their compulsion to be in charge of everything overrules their desire to help others. And when they figure this out, the political systems, the reasons why damaged, psychologically unwell people find themselves, so craving power that they are willing to do all of the nasty things necessary to accumulate it. When they finally figure out how to keep these people away from the controls, maybe we'll make some progress. When you look back at the American Declaration of Independence and it lists its grievances and so forth, then the subsequent system that grew up around that was a deeply suspicious system where they had divided powers in such a way where the hope was that they could keep, even if somebody was a tyrant, they could limit the scope of their damage through the other branches of government. And think about these very hopeful people who are saying, we're going to get rid of the old system and now we can design one completely. We're going to generate a brand new system all our own. One of the fathers, Thomas Jefferson, had written in his notes that no generation should be enslaved by the rules and regulations of a previous generation. You should not let, he was even of the impulse that this document that we're creating, the Constitution, should be subject to revision in a constant. It should be constantly revised because you cannot be held prisoner by some previous generation. Don't let ideas that seemed okay in 1775 or 1789, don't let them rule you in 2025 if circumstances change. And I wish we more embraced this idea that history or life belongs to the living. You should not be controlled by dead people they haven't gone through the journey you're going through. Their circumstances are very radically different. And consider the wisdom of that. If life is for the living, then that means you really owe your kindness and your loyalty to the people that are going through this with you right now. We're all on the same team. Those people back there that didn't have to deal with the circumstances that you're dealing with, you owe them no loyalty. I'll give you another example of that particular phrase. Okay, so I grew up in Oakland, California. That was the bulk of my upbringing was there. And so naturally, I rooted for the Oakland Raiders football team. And for years and years, it was a ferociously good team. But for going on about, 30 or 40 years now, they have sucked as a franchise. And they are well known for moving perpetually. They moved from Oakland down to Los Angeles. Then they moved back to Oakland. Then they moved to Las Vegas. And no doubt at some point in the future, they will move to Scottsdale or Edmonton for that matter. This is a franchise who has demonstrated over and over and over again, it does not care about its fans. It is chasing the money. And so it has expressed, not in words, but in deeds, I don't give up about you. You are merely a consumer that I am going to sell merchandise to. Your loyalty is important to me, but my loyalty is I owe you none. Okay, here's what I decided to do on the move to Las Vegas. I said, wait, hang on. I don't owe them anything. I don't know anybody there. They've never given me anything except 30 years of misery. And they're badly run. They are perpetual, they make colossal errors and they demonstrate no loyalty. It would be very much like, why am I about to get married to a woman who's been divorced 3 times and clearly only is interested in the money? Maybe I should look for someone else. And that's what I did. I said, I'm not going to root for these people anymore. I believe that Oakland Raiders fans, Las Vegas Raiders fans, are actually waking up now to the idea that you're not a football team. You are a corporation. And you're living off the loyalty of people who are just diehards who don't understand the imbalance of this relationship. Mm-hmm. And so I believe that what happens in a lot of human endeavors is there's an impulse to stay loyal to people that are not necessarily good for you. Now, if you consider what we were talking about moments ago when, men and women and being in a relationship, and does it always have to be good? Well, I'm not expecting you to win the Super Bowl every year, but for goodness sake, try. You got to show me you're trying. I think somebody did the math to actually demonstrate that you can make as a team that never wins as you can being a team that wins all the time. Mm-hmm. And the reason is that super cheap teams that don't pay for anything and they have crappy, accommodations and so forth, and get the city that they're in to pay for the stadium so the owner doesn't have to, they do just fine because of the way that the NFL is
Yeah.
structured as a monopoly.
Do you follow hockey?
Yes,
Do you know the
indeed.
Edmonton Oilers? Born and raised, very similar thing where you can see that if you just, kind of go behind the scenes kind of unscathed, yeah, it's a very similar pattern. And then
Yeah.
if you're part of the franchise, it's you get paid this, this specific amount and you're set, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So forgive me for even going into the sports thing, of which I'm not an expert. What I am an expert in waking up from the idea that I owe a team my loyalty. The team has nothing to do with me. They don't really care about me. Now, if you've got, the way that professional sports originated with the idea that club teams from localities, those people that were part of the team, they were part of the community. They lived there. They grew up there. When New York played Boston, it was New Yorkers playing Bostonians. Now, oh my God, forget about it. There's no way that your quarterback's going to be with your team forever. They're going to bounce for a variety of reasons. And when you look at college football now, that's become a circus, because literally a guy will almost go to the national championship with the Oklahoma Sooners, and then a year later he's playing for Texas Tech, and then the year after that he's at Michigan, and they're chasing what they call NIL money, which is you can now pay college players. So they are saying, I don't want to go to Alabama unless I see your checkbook. How much are you going to pay me?
Mm-hmm. And then
Oh my Lord.
you think about some of the best, the best athletes in the world. And you can see that no matter what team they're part of, what they're bringing to the table, how they're showing up every day.
Yeah, professional athletes have to have superhuman competitiveness, almost to the point of mental illness. They have to be like the story of Wayne Gretzky when he was at the LA Kings. He's married to Janet Jones, very happily married, and she's at rink side. She's in that front row, right off the plexi. He's playing. All of a sudden, the plexi becomes disentangled and it literally bops her on the head. I mean, you've seen those things. They're heavy. So she, among other people, gets knocked on the noggin, and he races over to see if she's okay. So she's, she got wobbly, but she goes, no, I'm okay. I'm okay. We're going to go to the hospital. He goes, so you're okay? She goes, yeah. And so he goes back and skates the rest of the game. Now, everybody's criticizing him going, Wayne, you should have gone with your wife to the hospital. What they don't understand about Wayne Gretzky is he's the great one because he can't stop himself because he has to play hockey. Yeah. It's not, he's superhuman.
Probably neck and neck with his first love.
No. We know what his first love is. His first love is hockey.
Yeah.
And that's part of what makes him the great one, is this mentally unbalanced need to play that game. But think about the rest of us. The rest of us we're not like that. We are not so dedicated to something that it is an irrational need to do it. And although he does seem like a nice fella, I don't know that much about Wayne, but what's your impression of, is he a good bro? What's he like?
I feel good vibes from him.
Yeah. Seems like it.
Family man, from what my understanding is.
Yeah, it is. Isn't it a funny thing to think about, the public persona of some people and the sort of image they cultivate, and then people will discover they're not like that in private. I've had the extremely good fortune of meeting a lot of celebrities in my time, and they have, to a man and woman, been delightful. Although my favorite is Eli Manning. That guy was so himself. He was so unassuming and so wonderful. I vastly prefer him to his brother. And not that Peyton Manning is a bad guy. It's just that Eli Manning was so cool and genuine. If you don't mind, Catania, I'll just have to tell you, one of the commercials that we shot with Eli Manning was Chad Pennington was at the time the quarterback of the New York Jets, and Eli had been brought on to be quarterback of the New York Giants. They were right out of the same draft class. They were pretty much the same age, and they were now the new hope of these two teams. Well, in New York, people have favorites. Some people are Giants fans and some people are Jets fans. But the idea in the commercial was that Toyota has a lot of models to choose from, so there's something for everybody. That was the idea of the commercial. There's something for everybody. So Eli Manning and Chad Pennington were going house to house in some borough of New York, trying to get the family to cheer for their team. And so Chad, who had majored in broadcast journalism so that he could go on to be a sports announcer after his football career. He was a very handsome kid, beautiful head of flowing blonde hair. He was a really handsome guy. And he's being very charming and he's making his case. And at the end of it, the family turns to Eli and he holds up, with oven mitts, he holds up a pie and he goes, I baked you a pie. And that was his argument. And I'm telling you, it was so him. It was just 100%. He was so genuine and sweet and perfect in his delivery. I'm thinking, he is not an actor. The reason this is working is because that's who he is.
He's candid all the time.
He's just like that. I baked you a pie. And in that moment of watching him, I think they only had to do like 3 takes because it was just so perfect every time. I thought to myself, oh, I got a feeling Eli Manning is a happy person because he doesn't have to pretend. Just everywhere he goes, he is who he is. He showed up with no entourage, ready to go, lines memorized. I think he was 15 minutes before his call time, drove himself to the set, and we all just went, well, this is new. Okay. Fantastic. The director, God, I love this guy. The director was giving him like, could you do this, but not so much that, and then do this and so forth, and he was giving them just a laundry list of instructions. And finally, at the end of this diatribe, Eli goes, less is more. Just tell me, where do you want me to stand?
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my God, it's so great. He's just
so real.
Well, the reason I'm telling you that, Catania, is because of your comment about authenticity and what a desirable quality is to meet somebody who's authentic. Because I can tell you, it was filling my soul like a fill up at a gas station. I mean, I was just looking at him, going, "Oh, he's happy and sincere. Oh, no wonder Tom Coughlin loves him so much. The coach, he's listening. He's paying attention." But authenticity also is so much less effort for everybody else around him.
There's a lightness to it.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
It's just, now, some people are sort of authentically acerbic, I suppose, but I don't know. Maybe not. What do you think?
And maybe people go through periods where maybe they're not afraid to show their authentic self, that they're in a bad mood and they project outward. Maybe it's a season, maybe that's just their demeanor, but there is something about when people aren't wearing a mask, because that is an energy suck. If you have to show up to a space or walk in rooms where you have to put on this mask and pretend to be someone that you're not, it's so draining, and people pick up on it much more.
Yeah, I've had my bad moments. I look back at my behavior when I was in my late 20s and 30s, and I just cringe because, like so many people, I was trying to get ahead, and I was very frustrated by certain things that I didn't do well, and the frustration spilled out not as an admission that I wasn't any good at this, or if I blame other people or try to defend myself, and my poor wife, had to put up with this hot-tempered, short-fused person. And now when I look back and cringe, I think, wow, it's really hard to be self-aware that you're not being, and, if you had asked me if I was being my authentic self, I probably would have said yes, but I was really operating off of expectations and other people's desires, and I think a frustration with systems that I didn't think were fair, not to me, just fair in general. And in your experience, Catania, are you running into a lot of that sort of temper tantrum-y behavior out of young men? Because I was really bad in my 20s.
Periodically, feel like in general, doesn't matter whether in person or virtually or male to female, I feel like there's this mentality of, or this level of consciousness where people feel like if they shout the loudest, they will be heard.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the problem. I think it really comes to where they are in life. But I also can relate. Like, I'm 35 and I feel like there's a lot of societal pressure. There's definitely this eagerness to want to get ahead because you always feel like you're falling behind.
Yeah.
You're kind of I think there's a lot of information saying, if you would have lived 20, 30 years ago, you could have had a better chance than you do now. And you're kind of in this hamster wheel. And then you kind of have to go through these motions of, am I truly happy kind of living under these specific, I guess, constraints, I guess. And so it's a matter of, I think, finding yourself through that. And I can admit, I'm still learning different aspects of myself, of what makes me truly happy, what my priorities are. But I think, don't they say that before the age of 40, you're still in an experimental learning phase. And then inherently on the other side of 40 is where the wisdom comes and the teaching. So I'm kind of trying to be humble in that sense of I'm still in a space of self-discovery.
I find that I'm still in an age of self-discovery and I'm well past 40. But I do have an impulse now that I didn't used to have, and I can feel it, which is the enjoyment of trying to mentor people. And I think, like I was saying before, that in office spaces, it's the older generation is just getting sloughed off because they're too expensive. They're not really too expensive because they have so much institutional knowledge. They actually keep the machine running the same way that CPOs do in the Navy, but they're perceived as too expensive because the quarterly earnings report is just about to come out and the CEO's bonus is tied to EBITDA. And if he sloughs off 35 people, he can make his number and then he'll be fine. The organization suffers and those people are sent into a tailspin. But I'm doing the right thing because I get a bonus. And this place we're at now is like a return to feudal Spain, where you exist at the whim of the landlord. And it doesn't feel the same as it used to feel. There used to be a sort of shared destiny. Now, maybe I'm wrong about this, and I probably am wrong about this. My guess is that people in your age cohort are highly conscious of two developments. One, it's not perfect, and maybe it isn't as good as it used to be, but we are, courtesy of the internet and courtesy of social media, we are a lot more sort of aware of the forces that are shaping our destiny. And there are voices that are trying to bring us together as a team to sort of acknowledge that, like a bad run of weather, we can get through this if we stick together. But I also think you're correct when you say that they're being taught, a lot of people are being taught that the loudest voice is the one that counts, as opposed to, there used to be a time when dignity ruled, when it was the persuasiveness of your argument that mattered. And it really, really mattered that it wasn't so much that you were loud. In fact, that would have been perceived as boorish and therefore unattractive and undesirable. And let's not let this person have any more power than they have now. Thank you very much. I suppose there have always been demagogues, but it does feel as though demagogues are being rewarded in a way they weren't before, that the incentives of algorithmic content selection it favors outrage and rage baiting and so forth.
But I wonder, because you hear of all these analogies of like, I remember reading a story once. It was talking about like a king. Well, the people that sit at the table with the king are typically, they can be much smarter than the king because the king holds the power. But the people that listen, observe, and maybe have more persuasive tendencies have more power because they can control the king. And so when I think about that, also when I think about another quote of sometimes the wisest man admits he knows nothing.
Well, yeah, that's true. The more you know, the less convinced you are
Mm-hmm.
about the scope of your knowledge. Please continue. I'm sorry, but
Mm-hmm.
you're 100% right.
Yeah, and it's obviously those two examples are far on each side of the scale, but I just sometimes wonder that you don't necessarily have to be loud and shout it. And just because you're potentially neutral doesn't mean that if you don't pick, like you haven't chosen a side, or they say, what's that saying? If you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. I don't necessarily believe in that.
I'm really glad to hear you say that, nor do I. You don't fall for anything. In fact, it's the opposite. So often you come from a background where there is a lot of inculcation of a certain dogma, and they're banging it into you when you are far too young to really understand you're being propagandized and you're being programmed. And then at some stage much later, there are cracks in the edifice, and then you just go, wait, hang on. All of the hypocrisies you're accusing other people of, we're guilty of the same ones. So wait a minute. When the scales come off your eyes and all of a sudden you're seeing more clearly, it's at this point when you're thinking, well, if you don't believe in something, you're going to fall for anything. No, on the contrary, I am now not falling for that because I'm willing to acknowledge it's easy to believe falsely in something or believe in something false. So it's refreshing to hear you say that because I so often hear that trope and I'm going, I'm not so sure about that. I think being deeply skeptical about most things is probably, it doesn't mean you have to be nasty about it. It's just, where are your notes on that?
Yeah. And I think like in that too, I think right away I'm like, oh, resiliency is being adaptable, always being adaptable.
Yeah. So let me share a story that you may have seen in one of my social media posts. It was something that was told to me by an economics professor, and it was about a culture in the Trobriand Islands are off the coast of Papua New Guinea, and they're this little chain of islands where the principal foodstuff is a kind of yam, and the yam is a very particular sort of foodstuff, and what it turns out it's sort of a birth control device. What happens is, if you eat these yams in a certain quantity, pregnancy doesn't automatically occur after sex. So for a long time, this tribe was not absolutely making the connection between sex and babies. There was a good reason why they weren't making that connection. It just seemed so random.
Yeah.
So they developed this kind of intuition that the babies were being delivered from some other island, like they would arrive through the spirits of some other island. So this place had a very unique and distinctive culture on Earth. Well, as part of their culture, these yams they would plant them a certain way, they would cultivate them a certain way, and then they would have 2 festivals every year, one during the planting and one during the harvest of the yam dance. And the thinking goes that if you do a really good yam dance, you're going to have a brilliant crop. So the really good yam dancers would have a lot of status. First choice of mate, hut near the chief, lots of perks. And if you were a really good yam dancer, the thinking goes, maybe you could even be chief. Okay, well, along comes in the 18th century this French explorer vessel. And among the people on this ship, beside the botanists and the, zoologists and the soldiers, was this priest whose job it was to convert the natives. So he was very charming and he was very quick and he learned the local language and everybody loved him. And he was trying his best to convert these people. And he became a kind of favorite of the chief, who treated him a little bit like a pet. He would take him everywhere and he would learn things from this priest about the outside world. And then one day, at the annual yam planting, they do this yam dance, and the chief turns to this priest in front of everybody and says, "So, what did you think of the yam dance? Do you think it will bring in many yams?" And the priest says, "Well, I think it was admirably vigorous." And he says, "No, of course, but I mean, do you think that it will bring in many yams?" And the priest says, "Well, the dance, for all of its beauty, is kind of not really necessary to the process. The yams are going to come up fine whether you dance or not. So keep it, but it doesn't really affect the yam dance, the yam culture." And so my question to you now, Catania, is what happened to the priest? Take a guess.
I really don't know.
Well, he's dead. And they killed him. And when I ask that question of audiences, about 99 times out of 100, they go, "Oh, yeah, they killed him." And I go, "Yes, not only did they kill him, but I want to know why you knew that.
Yeah.
You've never heard that story. How did you know that's what happened?" And people go, "Because he was messing with the power. Because if he says the yam dance is ridiculous and isn't necessary, then why the hell is this guy the chief?"
Yeah.
And as soon as you threaten the power, that's when the irrationality really kicks in. You are messing with the system. So what it means is that if you have decided to hang on to any programming that you've gotten, as soon as you start to question it, people react violently because you have interrupted either the source of their real power and their real money. Like, you're standing there in all those robes and that funky hat. And I'm thinking to myself, this is all a bunch of BS. You're in real trouble now. You're a heretic now. Okay, that's one thing, but it's almost as powerful. As soon as you have disturbed someone's interpretation of the world, as soon as you have said, "I'm not sure that the way you're living is really the design you're supposed to follow," that psychological trauma, it's very dangerous because you've threatened someone's personality.
Quality of life. Yeah.
And they're going to react, and they're not just going to go, "Huh, it's very interesting." They're not going to do that. They're going to come at you. And this happens in all kinds of manifestations, whether it is a political system or it is certainly in religions, but it's, in traditions and other things. And I think we all have to walk through life going, I'm not going to lash out and react violently when somebody questions my interpretation of things, because I don't think that is going to create thriving. I think it's better if I just sort of, "Wow, that's very interesting that you have that point of view. Please tell me more about why you feel that way."
Yeah.
Maybe, and by the way, there is actually something to be said for that crazy yam dance. Like, I'll give you 2 examples of what I'm talking about. They've done studies with fungi that demonstrate that funguses react differently to their environment when they feel the vibration of human presence. So like an example would be, a lot of ancient cultures, sort of Neanderthal and on, Paleozoic or whatever, they would do drums. And they would have these big drum circles and they would sit around the campfire and they'd beat the drums. And the drums, of course, send frequencies into the firmament. And that affects the way fungus grows. And I mean, very much. Like the fungus will start to move towards the sound. Okay, so that's one thing. So you could make an argument that the yam dance may have actually had a botanical effect on the yam crop. You don't, maybe, It's
Maybe.
maybe. Okay. The
That's
second
a good
thing,
argument. That's interesting.
right? The second thing is the yam dance was a cultural event that brought the entire village into a singular place, and that it was a celebration of the revival of the new year, and that they were going to, this was the source of our food, and we're going to have a prosperous and healthy time. And the dancing itself was a creative expression. It's a creative act. And there, you might even make an argument that somebody who does a particularly good yam dance is a healthy and good candidate for procreation. Like that they would, right? They're coordinated and they're artistic and expressive. So I don't mean to belittle the yam dance. There's something to be said for the yam dance.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying that, when somebody comes in and they question that the yam dance is actually performing the thing that it's doing, baby, you're playing with fire right now.
Especially when you see that things have been challenged, but it's been a slow progression, right? I feel like when you challenge, it seems like in human behavior, when you challenge the ego abruptly, you can get it's very reactionary.
Yeah.
It's potentially very reactive. But if it's a slow progression, it's like people forget. They don't realize where maybe the manipulation is getting
I
pulled.
think it's a really wise insight. There's a phenomenon called the Overton window. Have you ever heard of this?
Never.
Okay, so the Overton window's premise is that when a part of society tries to progress too quickly, the Overton window is how much progress you can make before it sponsors a counter-reformation, like a really violent reaction. It's pretty much hues to what you were just saying, which is you can do this. As soon as you do that much more, it's going to provoke, as opposed to it's like there's a frog in a frying pan. You turn the heat up too quickly and it jumps out. But you turn it up a little bit at a time, you can cook it and it'll never know. So the Overton window is like, you can give the women the vote, but, electing them president, that's too far. Elective office, why? Supreme Court justice, are you insane? Women are emotional. These things, just as you suggest, they need to go at a certain pace in order to keep from breaking the opportunity. And it's the same for each of us individually. Our own psychological safety and comfort can progress only so quickly. I think that might be why it's so difficult to persuade people. Particularly, it's difficult to persuade them in politics because it's almost binary. If you take up an opposite position or you take up a position that challenges their vote, by changing their mind, they feel like they've lost and they're not going to do it. You can talk facts at them all day long and they will not change their opinion a jot because you have threatened too much. Now, this is partly why I believe so much in the idea that life gets easier when people like you. It's easier for somebody who you like to persuade you than it is for somebody you actively don't like. Like they're never going to talk you into something, But if you like them, they are open enough to at least be aware there's another way of thinking about this. It doesn't mean I have to change my mind, but it does mean I'm willing to believe that there is more than one way to look at this. That is all the wedge you need for someone to evolve in their thinking.
It's that trust, but then a willingness and an openness to receive new ideas, new perspectives.
That's hard for a lot of people.
It kind of leads to what we were talking about before about like almost that graceful impact where you don't challenge the ego, but you come from a direction of still empowering them, but making them actually make the right choice.
Have you ever seen a show called Say Yes to the Dress? Okay, so my wife loves that show. And because it's a TV show, they need drama. Like they can't simply have a woman walk in and choose one of 5 and say, wow, I really like this. And then everybody's happy. That's not a show. No, a show needs conflict. So what they'll do is, that there's some producer behind the scenes who has deliberately made sure that the mother-in-law doesn't like the dress that the bride likes. Like they want to stir up disagreement. Now, ultimately, there is always a happy ending in those episodes. They always say yes to some dress, but they really play up the idea that, I don't like that. I think it's too fluffy. And the other one says it's not sexy enough. And the third one says not sexy enough. Right. And so it's all a big charade, because in my experience with watching and participating in weddings and so forth, it's first of all, the groom never gets to see that dress. If you've got your head screwed on, do not let the groom have a vote. Good Lord. Are you crazy?
Yeah.
Don't let him anywhere near this process. Get the hell out of here. That's why it's bad luck for the husband to see the bride in the dress.
Yeah.
Not because it's bad luck, but because keep him out of the decision.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I almost think about like the Three Little Bears where it's like, oh, it's too hot, it's too cold, and it's just right.
Yeah, well, it is always surprising to me how vocal some of these people will be about their opinions. Like, I'll give you an example. So, young woman, she looks fabulous in this thing. You can just tell. You can tell from her body language. You can tell from the expression on her face. She really likes this one. And then somebody weighs in going, oh, no, no, no. And I'm thinking, shut up. Who gave you a vote? Can you not read her face? Do you not see her pleasure? Your job, this is not about you, Barbara. This wedding is about her. Maybe take a step back and be happy for her. But, like I say, it's not a show unless Barbara's being a piece
But
of...
you make a really good point, because this is something that came up in conversation recently for myself too. I'm kind of the type of person where when I show up in a room and I'm around specific people, I find myself to be almost really reading kind of how someone is feeling emotionally. And there is a level of poise and a little bit of like allowing people to be in their own experience. And then there's some people, it's almost as if they just share immediately the first thing that comes to mind.
Yeah, no filter.
Yeah. I don't know if that's authenticity once again, but...
Well, okay, that is a really, really great way of putting that. So somebody comes in and they just say the first thing that's on their mind. They're not really doing a calculus of what I'm about to say, how is that going to affect this person? So they're not self-aware. Now, is that authentic? Well, for some people, it really is. You know that we are all on a spectrum of everything. Everything that we do and we are on a spectrum. And most of us, more than 2/3 of us, are in one standard deviation. And so we all kind of look at each other and go, yeah, Barry, maybe you should why would you say that? She doesn't look fat, okay, in those jeans. Why would you say that? All right. Now, is Barry being authentic? Well, depending on where he is on the spectrum, it's that he does not have he doesn't have radar like the rest of us have. Now, for the person that is highly aware of the authenticity of all of our friends, we'll accommodate that, hell, that's just Barry. You're like, don't pay him any money. Don't worry, I'm not. I understand. He does that. Did you ever hear this story? You probably have. It's very famous. It's an old folk tale about there is a little boy who has gotten trapped in the ice. He's fallen through the ice and he's drowning and he might freeze to death and fall. Okay, so he's in his little jacket and this woman, his mother, is screaming, oh my God, my son, he's fallen through the ice. Somebody save him. Some good Samaritan comes along and gets rid of his jacket, dives into the freezing water, retrieves this child, gets him back to the surface. He himself is now suffering from hypothermia, but he gives this kid mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, brings him back from the dead. And now the child, restored to health, back in the arms of his mother. And the mother says, he had mittens. Okay, right?
That's a whole thing in itself. Yeah.
So this is one of those cases where, oh, for goodness sake, that's just Margaret.
Yeah.
What are you going to do? I'm not going to take offense. I'm not going to be upset. I might laugh, but I'm just going to realize, brother, this isn't about you. It's not that she's not grateful that you saved her son. It's just, that's Margaret or Barbara, whoever it is. It's just them.
Yeah.
You can't don't let them affect what you know to be true. You saved this child's life. And, having the poise and the self-awareness in your own self to not let them affect your energy in a bad way, not let you, the more mature, like whether it's a number of lifetimes or whether it's just you've been given the grace to go through life as your authentic self, your authenticity will not be affected by the ill behavior of other people unless they are victimizing someone else. And then that's an entirely different circumstance. But, imagine, let's pretend for the sake of argument that we actually saw that happen, that everything went down exactly as it described up to and including the woman saying, he had gloves. Okay, now what you want to do is you want to turn to the guy that just saved the first leg. And I want you to imagine that his response is like, he just thinks that's hysterically funny.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh my gosh, I know.
Now, when he acts that way, then you go, wow, that is a self-actualized person where he sees the humor in it, not the lack of gratitude. He hasn't vibed on the lack of gratitude. He's just laughing to himself that, oh my God, this woman, my God.
Totally. I know, and that's another thing too that I thought the first thing that came to my mind is it's so interesting that people have in-person experiences, and people cannot have the ability to have more of a bird's eye view of the overall experience in
Yeah,
itself.
I'm trying to wow. I'm trying to graduate to what you just described. I'm trying to get to the bird's eye view where you go. The negativity, well, actually, I've got a kind of gift for your listeners. What I sort of make my living doing now is telling stories. And the reason it's effective and the reason people pay for it is because they recognize kind of what you were just saying, which is if you can perceive events a certain way and look at them through a certain lens, often through the benefit of time, you'll realize that negative experience was a gift. It taught you something that you can now use for the rest of your life. Or it gave you sufficient peace in your soul to not let that affect you the way that it used to see now. And so here's what I'm discovering is that because I'm making my living this way, I am now going home and immediately writing down what happened so that when I'm in the event itself, I'm going, oh, this is a story.
Yeah.
My flat tires, which a minute ago I was really upset about. Oh no, this is a story. Just now come what may, because I want to see how this plays out. And this actually did happen to me, Katanya. So I did, in fact, get these flat tires, and I was sort of stranded, and I needed to get towed. But the problem is when the tow truck takes you down to get this was at night. So this was about just about 8 p.m. So I start to go, oh, this is not a real drag. This is an experience. I called for the tow truck. Tow truck's on its way. I call my son to say, hey, would you mind meeting me down at this tire store so that you can bring me home? Because this tire store is going to be closed. I'll have to leave it overnight in their parking lot. He goes, yeah, no problem, Pop. So here's what then happens. So because of this vibe that I'm on, right, which is I'm going, this isn't a disaster. This is an experience. No doubt a story will come out of this. The tow truck driver shows up and he's very chatty. And I think that's wonderful. So we're yucking it up, right? And we're actually enjoying this process. Now my son pitches up because he saw the tow truck and he swings by. And now my son says, are you guys hungry? I'll go get us some burgers. Now he's including the tow truck driver in this. The tow truck driver says, yeah, man. So my son goes and gets the three of us burgers. So already, again, the vibe has elevated because the tow truck driver's going, damn, I wish all my calls were like this. With the tow truck driver and I, we go down, and it turns out that the tire store was literally just lowering the things, the gates, or I forget what they call those things. And they see the tow truck pull up. Now, I'm not expecting them to reopen, definitely, but the guys inside the tire store go, no, just roll it in. We'll put it right on the rack. And that way you can pitch up when it's opening time and we'll get it. You'll be first in line. And I'm like, okay, fantastic. Then the tow truck driver, my son, and I were all eating those burgers and just having a great time. Then we go home.
Party. Yeah.
Right. Now, I cannot help accept the sneaking suspicion that the linchpin was not interpreting as this being bad, but this is a story. Do you see how much good luck came my way after that? Like, first of all, my son was like, his orientation was, are you guys hungry? Not that, I don't know that I vibed this onto my boy, but the thing was that his reaction was not, oh, this is a big drag that I have to leave the house and come pick you up. It was, are you guys hungry? Then the tow truck driver's going, damn, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Then when we get down to the tire store, instead of just closing the thing and going, hey, we'll be open tomorrow, they go, no, roll it in. We'll get you first in line. And then it was the tailgate party. And I'm just going, there's something going on here.
Yeah.
It's the come what may thing. And I think it was because I was only able to do the 30,000 foot version of it that you suggest that a mature person with life experience would do. Only because it has now become my practice that my bad experiences are sometimes they will contain a silver lining. Now, don't get me wrong. It's not like I want to go out there and have a car accident. It's not that. It's just that if you don't let the minor things get to you, they can become fodder for a certain kind of experience.
Yeah, that's well said. I always just think too, your mindset, creates your reality. Your perspective creates your reality.
It certainly influences it. It's going to have an impact, almost like a breeze. A breeze on a summer day doesn't take it from 100 degrees down to 98 degrees. But what it does do is it is a relief for, it allows you a certain amount of gratitude for, that was a welcome change. And so, yeah, it's not that you're going to change meteorology, but you're going to appreciate when things maybe swing your way a little bit.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I wish I had been a believer in this much younger. particularly the idea that even bad experiences, don't carry guilt around of something you did wrong or badly. Instead, go, okay, that's a lesson that I'll get to apply from
Mhm.
now on.
And same for myself. It's like, it's once again, it's not in the user's manual for life. But I think what happens for most is you start to pick up on patterns. And when you start to recognize those patterns, then you get to see that, huh, okay, maybe if I twist things just a little bit in more of a positive light, how differently the outcome can be.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about, the toughest thing to deal with is that when you encounter somebody who's nasty, where you say to yourself, this may not be who they are. It's that they're going through a rough patch. There are some people that are just D-bags, they just are. But it's also much more likely that somebody is having a bad day for some other reason. You know how often couples actually don't fight about the thing they're fighting about? You've heard
Yeah.
this joke. Okay, so they're going, oh, yeah. Oh my God, I had a terrible time at Thanksgiving. I asked my mother to pass the salt and it came out, you ruined my life, you bitch.
There's a really good, that reminds me entirely of Esther Perel's work. She is a relationship therapist and she's a TEDx speaker. She's actually, her TED Talk probably moved me the most, but
Oh,
I loved her analogy. She just was sitting on a talk show talking about how, your partner will get so annoyed at the little things, but it is the undertone narrative that you lived, either maybe something you adopted throughout your life, whether that's through your parents' relationship or just something that, once again, there's different, noises and influences coming in, whether social media, what have you. You start to create these different biases and narratives in your head. And so it's insane how you could be fighting over someone didn't put the contact lenses in the garbage or they
right.
cleaned up the
Right.
kitty litter, but really underneath it all, it's something much deeper. It has nothing to do with the
Yeah.
actual argument.
Yeah, it's by the way, interestingly enough, there's a kind of that's a dark and light. There's two different versions of that very phenomenon. So the dark one's what you talk about, which is like somebody says, you never clean this up and it becomes a whole thing. And now you're fighting about that, but that's not really what you're fighting about. You're fighting about something else. And you got to get past that little thing and say, look, you're yelling at me about this and I understand and I'm sorry about that, but you're upset about it probably because of something else. So let's take a minute. Let's dig down into what you're really angry about, and let's see if we can't solve it. Okay, that's a very mature way to do it. Probably not the likely approach I would have taken. Okay, but here's the other version of that. This kind of sweet version of that. Procter and Gamble, when A.G. Lafley was the chairman or president of Procter and Gamble in Cincinnati. As you know, Procter & Gamble has this gigantic line of products, everything from Duracell batteries to Pampers diapers and Tide and Bounty paper towels and everything in between. And because they organize their company in such a way that there is a vice president for each one of these brands. And the brand vice president, it is their responsibility for their own profit and loss. And so they are all very aggressive about advertising their products. Well, Procter & Gamble bought they bought a 60-second window on the 2014 Sochi Olympics, the Winter Olympics. And that naturally all of the vice presidents of the various brands are all competing to say, hey, I want Duracell to be on that opening 60 seconds in the opening ceremonies, the commercial that everybody watches. That's the one where it's like Super Bowl Sunday. Everybody watches the opening ceremonies and they wanted to see it, or it was like the first event or whatever. Okay, that was the prime real estate. And this sort of competition for that opening slot, Lafley was sort of like undone by the viciousness of the competition. And then there was another thing, which was the suggested ideas were all very self-interested. So there was like, how many paper towels picks up 30% more, and Tide makes whiter whites and like that, right? Typical Procter & Gamble sort of aggressively, this is why our product is superior. And at one point during this whole thing, apparently I wish I'd been in the room, but the thing that he told all of these guys was, I just want you to write me a love letter to my customers. Now, what then came out was the most lovely, beautiful example of how an Olympic athlete doesn't become an Olympic athlete overnight. From the time they are a little infant, it is the mother lifting them up and encouraging them every time they fall. From the time they're a little bambini to being a toddler, to being a young kid playing hockey or ice skating, figure skating or cross-country skiing or whatever, they show these 5 mothers every time picking the kids up and encouraging them to keep going. And at the very end of the commercial, It's the championship moment when the figure skater finally lands this amazing jump, and the time when the snowboarder does this unbelievable aerial trick, and the hockey player scores the winning goal, and so on, right? Triumph after triumph after triumph. What do they all do? What do they all do? In the moment of triumph, they all look for their mothers. And it was just beautiful. And it was constructed with this very heartbreaking soundtrack, and it was gorgeous. And at the end of the commercial, that it just says, for teaching us that falling is part of the process or something like that. And it says, then it said hashtag because of mom, and then all the Procter & Gamble logos come up. Now, it was the fact that Lafley said it has to be about something more than clean clothes. So he takes the exact same situation in reverse. You're complaining about me not cleaning out the kitty litter, but you're really angry about something else. I could tell you all day long about how this will make your clothes cleaner, and it won't matter because it's not about clean clothes. It's about, do I see you? Do I appreciate you? I just want you to write me a love letter to my customers. And that is how you advertise, because it's never about the clean clothes.
It's pulling an emotional cord.
Yeah, it's acknowledging that people operate off their emotions. That's how they really make decisions. And all the more reason why, as you go through this life, it gets easier if people like you. And the way to make them like you is you've got to demonstrate you like them first. P&G, it works for Procter & Gamble because they were the ones that were the first movers and said, like, I see you, I appreciate you. And guess what? Everybody else does too. Like, if you don't think that everybody in the audience is ready to weep right now, they are. And the reason is they see how true that is. They see you. And you're standing in the supermarket. You are a mother, and it's difficult. It's challenging. It has a million challenges and a few rewards. But you're standing in the supermarket and you're looking at that shelf, and the Tide costs 72 cents more than the other one. And you go, yeah, but fuck you. Like, fuck this other one. What do I care? They don't care about me. The Oakland Raiders do not care about me. So I don't care about them. And Tide does care, so I care. And you in your whatever job you're doing, if you demonstrate you care, if you're unafraid to make gestures that seemingly are at random and no real cause, so much the better. That you should make somebody feel like they matter and they're seen, especially in those unexpected moments and that's why I like the mail so much, because it just shows up one day out of the blue with no context. And you're like, oh, okay, wow, this is random. There's a poem written on the envelope. What the hell?
Did you send that?
This morning.
This morning.
Yeah, I was at Good Stuff writing on the back of an envelope. And the poor waiter guy, Carlos, is looking at me going, he is writing some manifesto on the back of this envelope. This is a disturbed, frustrated individual.
Yeah.
And it's like writing like in order to fit it on the envelope, I had to write in like typewriter type. And so the sort of more orderly it is, the more obsessive it makes you look. Like, something ain't right with this guy. He's really putting a screed on this thing. So,
really setting some strong intentions.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, he's going to town. He's almost done. That omelet's done. But
yeah. Just to wrap this up, do you have any goals, any intentions that you want to go into the new year?
Yeah, very much. So we're going to do 2 live events. And when I say we, I've got a team up in Sheridan, Wyoming, and I have this brand, Storyfire. And Storyfire it's a course to help people tell stories better, because stories are the way that you can communicate to be more memorable and more emotionally resonant, very much like what we were just talking about. And so it often appeals to executives and students because they find that when they're able to express themselves better, the benefits to their career is abundant. And so the earlier you learn to be a good storyteller, the more opportunities will surface. So in the new year, I'm going to have 2 live events. I'm going to have one in Colorado where it's going to be a kind of pilot. We're going to get together and we're going to do a 2 or possibly 3-day workshop where they come in and they'll start with a story that they want to tell, and then by the end, they're like, they've got it. Like, it's really good. And then we're going to do the same thing again here at Terranea in my neck of the woods out in LA for a group of about 20. And here's my hope is that if we can make these go, if they can become economically viable, like, we make more than it costs us, I am just going to bang away at these events all year long, and I'm going to do them in different parts of the country because there's something glorious about sharing your story with other people and doing the boot camp of tuning it up to the point where when you walk out of there, you feel really confident that you can deliver this to a board of directors or to, a PhD committee, that you're like, you are wired. And it's just, it broadcasts who you are, not just what you brought to say. I think certainly in my career, being able to tell a good story was sort of the secret. It was not everybody recognizes a good idea when they hear it. It really matters how you sell it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like a really good example of this, if you don't mind my going into this tangent, both Airbnb and Uber were both cases where they had to get angel funding. They had to get VC to fund the operation before they could really get up and running. Now, in both cases, the reason that the companies were the explosive successes that they were is that the idea sounds stupid at first. There's a million reasons why it shouldn't work, but that's the secret to a great investment. It sounds dumb, but when you really, really think about it, it's like, yeah, but if it did work, it would completely revolutionize a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in order to get somebody to buy into the Airbnb as an investor, they have to understand the story. That you have to tell it to them like a visitor, like somebody who's experienced, and the same would be true of Uber. All you have to do to sell the Uber idea is you start with this. I want you to imagine it's Manhattan at 5 p.m. on a Friday night in the rain. What are your odds of getting a taxi right now? 0. Those are your odds. What if just with this device, you could have a car in front of you in 3 minutes? How am I doing so far? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that's different from saying we have an app that will deliver this kind of algorithm on, which is how most people approach it. The same way that the P&G people wanted to say Bounty paper towels will pick up 30% more moisture. It's not about that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's what I want to do in the new year is I want to make this go where we do our live events and the sort of live boot camps. And I think what will happen is people will much more thoroughly learn the lessons and they'll walk out with greater confidence and more able to take advantage of a tool that is at least 100,000 years old, which is telling stories around the campfire. That's the operating system for human beings.
There's so much when it comes to personal empowerment, but even so when it comes to just being in this digital landscape, I think a lot of people don't realize the power of their personal platform, but executing and telling their story in a way that resonates. But how do you know until you are in a circle and see like what part of the story lands and what needs to be tweaked? Because unfortunately, there are circumstances where people tell a story and it can fall flat in certain areas. So it's just having that, once again, mentorship to be able to fine tune it in a way that really reaches the hearts and like gets your point across.
Yeah. So if you think about a stand-up comedian, like during the 90s and the aughts, all of the major sitcoms had as their star a stand-up comedian. Well, the exception being Cheers. But it was no accident that they were choosing stand-up comedians because the comedians knew what was funny. So nobody had to tell them, can you do it this way? No, you're not going to tell Tim Allen how to tell a story. You're not going to tell Jerry Seinfeld what's funny. And so they already are just miles ahead in terms of knowing how the joke's going to land and who they are well, they didn't get there overnight. Mm-hmm. It was years of trying out material in front of audiences. And in the movie Comedian that Jerry Seinfeld is in, it's a documentary about his process of getting material. Like it took him a year to do it, to get 20 minutes worth of material. As they're going through the process, they are actually showing nights where he really bombed. And it's disturbing to watch Jerry Seinfeld not land. And you're going, oh, but this is part of the process. This happens. Mm-hmm. He's willing to do that, to work it out. It turns out he's willing to miss 100 jump shots. Yeah, that's what it takes. You got to practice. And having a live audience for you and having supportive players are going, maybe if you did this, that's a big difference between watching the videos and going, okay, I think I understand. Well, okay, let's see if you understand. Yeah. Stand up right now. Let's see it. Mm-hmm. One thing that we've been liberated by, just as you were suggesting a moment ago, which is now in the age that we live in, there are platforms that will allow you to tell your story and cultivate your personal brand and take a lot of swings at the plate. These devices, people are not fully conscious of the liberation that this offers you in 2 forms. The first is there is no expectation in your social media posts that they are going to be high production value. There's no expectation. If you just turn it on as you're on your walk, in the morning, or you're literally at the gym and a thought occurs to you, you can turn it on and record it. And if you blow the first 6 takes, nobody cares. And you can do a good take right up until this thing and then just cut. And it doesn't even have to be a good cut. You just cut and then keep going. And so there is no expectation that it's going to be great camera work. That's the first thing. The second thing is, nobody said you couldn't rehearse the crap out of it. This lets you watch yourself do it a million times. Now, when I do my social media posts, people are under the impression that that's the first take. No, that's usually about take 26, take 31. And people are like, what? And I'm going, yeah, I have grown so accustomed to seeing myself on camera. I no longer cringe when I blow it and it takes me 31 takes. It's just part of the process. Like Jerry Seinfeld actually bombing in front of the camera. Yeah, he's willing to do that. And it doesn't bother him. It doesn't bother him the way that it bothers other people. He's been there, done that. It's part of the process. That's what makes him as good as he is. Like, do you remember George Carlin? George Carlin's act was memorized. He did 90 minutes to 2 hours of material, word for word.
Embedded into his psyche.
And that is very hard work. That's a guy who's what's on display isn't just his genius for word construction. It's that every single word was meticulously worked out and rehearsed and memorized and rehearsed again and done in front of a small audience and heat tested and massaged and sanded. Then he's ready for the 30,000 seat arena. And it looks like it's just spilling out of him. Oh, yeah, no, he was a hardworking, dedicated to his craft. You know, he was a Wayne Gretzky level of dedication to that. And you'll see, like, there's another thing that that great stand-up comedians will do, which is they're not just going to do their material. They are praying somebody's going to heckle them, because the great ones are really, really ready for you. Like, they're going, oh, and here I am defenseless with a microphone. Never having done this before. What am I going to do? You're like,
Masters
shall we begin? You're like, yeah, I mean, the great ones are ready for anything. It's magnificent to behold. I just don't think people fully appreciate the level of dedication and hard work and willingness to fail that the great stand-up comedians exhibit. They think it's just someone on a street corner having a conversation. Yeah. And so what this will allow us to do is to fail a million times and nobody sees it. That, you know what you have to get over, what people have to get over is they have to get over cringing watching themselves. Yes. But the day you get over that fear, nobody's there to see it except you, so relax. But the day you can get over that fear is the day you turn pro, because now you're ready to get ready. Now you just built yourself a gym in your garage when you can do it on the phone and not be embarrassed to yourself.
Yeah. That learning curve is huge. And I always think of the analogy as a photographer. I work with so many people, and a big part of an extension of photography is when you do portrait shoots with people, you really have to bring down their emotional wall.
Right.
And you have to educate them and consult them and let them know they're not going to like every angle. And if you don't position yourself in a certain way to see what your power poses are, how do you know what is good?
Yeah, people are very self-conscious for good reason. I mean, self-consciousness is a defense mechanism, and there's so few people walk around fearlessly that, well, I mean, let's face it, it's a natural response to discomfort. And, you know, we're not models. Have you ever seen this guy? I'll send you his name, but he's on TikTok, and what he specializes in is he makes fun of fashion photography by adopting the crazy poses that they do. And so he was on a construction site dressed in, you know, he's got his hard hat on and his vest and stuff. And he's doing all those poses, you know, like Versace and, you know, Dior. And he's doing these poses and they're ludicrous. But because of the way they shoot them, all of a sudden you go, he really knows what he's doing. Like, he completely knows how this works. And he himself has done a video where he says, I started out to ridicule these people only to discover I get it now. I understand how this works, and they really do know what they're doing. It's like, I started out to make fun of them only to discover, oh no, it's an art form and they're really good.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
What? It's crazy funny to watch him standing. He's getting, he's adopted a pose. He's dressed in his outfit, and then a dumped, you know, like a skid steer is dumping dirt on him. and gravel, but because of the way they've shot it, it's gorgeous. And then he does one where he's on a forklift and he does this weird pose, and then they shoot it and you're going, actually, that's really cool. It makes the
Yeah.
industrial backgrounds really cool. And I'm going, it's so, and then he puts the title of the magazine, you know, he superimposes the magazine livery around him. And you go, yeah, that's totally a Vogue cover. Completely. Isn't that crazy?
Is that like an example of like juxtaposition? It's just like two opposite things in one, and he's figured out his niche.
The reason it worked was because he was having so much fun spoofing the genre that he was so uninhibited about doing it the way they do it that he was highly successful at it. It was his abandon. You could say, arguably, he was a very good male model. Like, he got it completely what you're supposed to do in order to make it work. I don't know. Have you ever seen Christian Is it Christian Maniscalco? Is that his name? He's a stand-up comedian. Very funny. But he's got this Italian accent that's, you know, like Italian New York accent. And he's like, what's with this guy and then Lincoln Tunnel? Okay, well, he does this thing, and the people that do impressions of him, in order to make it an effective impression, you have to really throw yourself into it. You have to abandon self-respect in order to do it properly. But he's so distinctive. His style is so him that when they imitate him, it's a kind of an homage. It's not a takedown. Even Christian Maniscalco doesn't mind watching these people do him because he knows what he's doing. He's doing it to be funny. But you have to abandon your reticence. You have to be able to just go, I'm just going to do this. I really respect that. The people that go, I'm going to dance without being self-conscious. I'm going to throw myself into this. And it's glorious. Wow. You really know how to bring things full circle. Brilliant.
Yeah.
You got a knack. Katanya, you're good at this.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you so much for having you on today.
That was a joy. This was lots of fun.
Yeah. But I hope we can follow up at a later point.
I hope so too. I'm going to send you this guy's TikTok link so you can watch his crazy videos, because I'm now appreciating on like 4 different valences. You know, 1, it's funny. 2, it's accurate. 3, I see how he's changed his opinion, right? And 4, I would love to know what Anna Wintour thinks of these covers.
Yeah. And where can our audience learn more about your circles?
Yes, thank you. So you can find me really easily on social media because I'm the only one in the universe that spells my name this way. So it's Nealfoard, Neal Foard. And if you just type me into anything, Instagram, Google, so forth, you'll find me. I'm pretty easy to find.
SEO is on point.
Well, like that way. I am not on Facebook, though. I've got a real problem with Facebook, so I'm not there. But I'm on Instagram, I'm on TikTok, I'm on YouTube, I'm on LinkedIn, etc. Then, if you're interested in this storytelling course, which is, I think, objectively really good, you can find that at www.storyfire.net. Storyfire, the name comes from sitting around the fire telling stories. Storyfire.net. Now, the reason I say the www in front of it, even though it's incredibly difficult, is that for some people, sometimes they can't get to the site unless they type that in. So if you have trouble finding it, there you go. And I hope you'll visit, if only to see my little introductory video that explains it.
And then for everyone else listening, much of Neal's work is a series of storytelling, and you definitely have to tune in because they're amazing.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Yeah, but thank you so much for joining me.
That's my pleasure.